Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, Effectively Managing Change in Nonprofits, featuring Anna Harms-Beach, Director of Principal Consulting at Cornerstone OnDemand. The Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation is excited to sponsor this presentation, and we thank you for attending. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To reduce background noise, all lines have been muted, but please note that there is a Q&A button located at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Please do feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We will have the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, if you are having any technical issues, please feel free to submit those questions via the Q&A window as well, and we'll address them immediately. Also, today's session and the associated slides will be posted on the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation website within 48 hours. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to these archives. Please feel free to share this presentation with coworkers and friends. Before I hand it over to our presenter, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce myself and the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation as the host of this presentation. My name is Alexis Denny, and I'm the Director of Nonprofit Empowerment with the Foundation, which was launched in 2009 in an effort to provide learning and talent management technology and pro bono HR consulting services to the nonprofit sector, both domestically and abroad. Next slide. Today's webinar, Effectively Managing Change in Nonprofits, is part of the nonprofit webinar series designed to provide expertise and best practices related to human capital for nonprofit leaders. This webinar series is an extension of the HR Pro Bono Core, which is the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation initiative, which provides HR-related coaching and consulting to nonprofit organizations at no cost. If you are interested in learning more about how your organization can benefit from the services provided through the HR Pro Bono Core, please do visit our website at cornerstoneondemand.org. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Anna Harms-Beach. Anna is the Director of Principal Consulting at Cornerstone OnDemand and currently manages the talent strategy team. Anna also has deep expertise in recruiting strategy and serves as the principal consultant for recruiting. Anna plays an integral role helping Cornerstone clients maximize technology adoption by delivering effective change management solutions. Anna, thank you for sharing your expertise. I'll go ahead and pass the presentation to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Well, I am assuming because you took the time to sign up for this webinar and join us today, you've already been thinking about change management. I'm assuming that you've planned some strategies in the past or you're working on planning a strategy right now. And that alone really gives you a leg up. So we've all been part of rollouts in the past where change management just got left by the wayside as the change took place. And we know how that feels. You know how easy that is to happen, where you just get caught up in the process of the rollout itself, and the communication just kind of gets left behind. And as an end user, if you've experienced that as an end user, you know how difficult it is to make that transition into a change when you don't have the proper knowledge about why the change is happening or the information you need to be able to effectively make the change as you go through it. So we'll spend some time today talking about that process so that you can properly help people move through the rollout that you're thinking about right now. The slide that we have in front of us at the moment is a result of a survey that Deloitte did that I found particularly interesting. You'll notice at the top we have 59% of survey participants noting that the way they would have improved their shared service journey was to implement change management. We have a tendency, as I mentioned, to just get so caught up in the process of preparing the change that we forget how important this is. So taking some time today to think about this process will hopefully help us to move along this path and make sure we've properly prepared for the change itself. So as we go through our discussion today, I'm not here to talk about a crazy, wild, outrageous plan for change management. This is really about a practical approach to how we orchestrate change. So just getting into the basics of how we're going to orchestrate change for our organization and for the individual. Ultimately, what we need to think about is how we make our implementation successful, because we know that our implementation is only successful if it rolls out well. And so whatever the change you're looking at right now, whatever rollout you're planning, if you don't get people to adopt that rollout, all the work you did up to that point doesn't really matter. And so we need to make sure we're taking the time to plan for that. What I hope for this presentation is that I can give you some new ways to think about change management, something that you can add on to your plan to increase the success of that rollout. With that rollout, what we're thinking about is making sure you get to end-user adoption, making sure that with that end-user adoption, they understand the need for the change. And if we can get you there, what you ultimately get is the ability for you to maximize your investment that you've made in either technology or in business process change that you're looking at right now. When we think about this, why do we need to do more than just say send an email out to tell the people that the change is upon us right now and this is what's happening? Well, change just naturally produces some degree of stress in humans. And that stress comes about even if the change is a good change, even if this is something that we want. There's just naturally some level of stress that comes along with change. So people can perceive a change as a threat even when that threat doesn't really exist. And just merely being able to communicate about that and talk through what that change is can alleviate a lot of that stress that's associated with the change. Sometimes that stress and threat is real, and if they can talk to us about that change, that stress threat, we can help figure out how to overcome that risk and deal with that as we go through the change as well. But we need to make sure we're helping people to move past that threat that they're perceiving as they go through the change itself. How do we actually set ourselves up for success as we go through this process? We have to design ourselves a structured process so that we can move our organization from our current state to the desired future state. We have to help our organization embrace the upcoming change through communication and through marketing. We have to determine what data and training each audience needs so we can help them be best prepared for the change as it takes place. If we do this well, the rollout itself should feel like a non-event. We should trickle information to people so that this leads up to the go live in a way that makes this feel very comfortable as they get to that point. We need to determine where we're going to encounter resistance as we go through the change and where we can utilize influencers within our organization to help us deal with the resistance that we encounter. And with that, we have to build a plan to maintain flexibility so that we can adjust as we go through this rollout. I would love to tell you with all the change management plans that I've built in the past that I could build them so that you never encounter any pockets of resistance and that they're all perfect. But the reality is there's always some spot where we encounter resistance that we hadn't planned on. And so when that happens, we have to be ready for that, and we have to know that, if a message isn't resonating, we need to change it. And if we see resistance we hadn't anticipated, we have to address it. So we have to make sure we're building a plan for flexibility and building a plan that allows for a loop that gets us information back so that we understand where that potential resistance may be. As we think about communication, we view it as having 4 fundamental needs. We view it as having the need for knowledge, skills, motivation, and structure. I'd like to talk through these 4 areas so that we better understand what each of these means. Knowledge is an area we tend to do a pretty good job of as we go through a normal change process. So with knowledge, what we're looking for is, what does the change involve? When is the change taking place? What are the interim steps as we go through this change? Who's responsible for what? What are the new policies? And then where am I going to find ongoing access to training as I go through this process? Those are areas that we do a pretty good job with. Skills are another area we tend to do a pretty good job with. And this is, what are the new technologies? What are the new processes and procedures as we go through this change and adjustment? What's the training that we need? Motivation tends to be an area that gets missed on a fairly regular basis. So motivation is talking about why the change is being made. What are the benefits that can be expected after we go through this change? As we talked about, change produces stress. So why do I want to go through that stress, and what can I expect to be a benefit after I go through that stress? Why and how this change matters to the organization, to the culture, and to the mission. As a nonprofit, you have an added advantage here from everyone else. You've got a group of people that are already bought into your culture, your mission. So making sure we really drive home the fact that this matters to your culture and mission really will be an easier process for you overall. The last area is structure, and this is another area that people tend to miss as they're thinking about their change management strategy. This encompasses making sure we have success criteria and reporting, program expectations laid out, and that it's clear that there's going to be management oversight and accountability. So in short, this is how we make sure that people understand that this isn't simply a flavor of the month, that this isn't something that if I just leave it alone and wait long enough, it's going to go away and I don't have to deal with it. So how do we make it really clear to people that somebody's going to be paying attention after this change goes live, and that we're going to notice whether they take part in this or not, and that it matters that they're participating as they go forward. So setting up ways that we're going to show them the success of the project and their involvement in it. So in short then, knowledge is what people need to know as they go through a change. Skills are what people need to do as they go through the change. Motivation is what people need to believe as they go through the change. And structure is what people need to be accountable. So let's talk about the practical ways that we deal with this. So when we think about knowledge, we deal with knowledge by providing documentation to people, giving them information about rollout plans, talking to them about schedules, giving them calendars of events, giving them memos, sending them emails, and planning meetings to get them the base information that they need. When we're providing them skills about the change that's happening, this is about training. If you're rolling out technology, this might be quick reference guides. This could be checklists. This could be job aids, or this could be coaching. Motivation gets a little more tricky. When we're talking about motivation, getting direct line managers involved in communicating this what's in it for me and the what's in it for the organization is hugely important. If we give this motivation communication from people that aren't in the direct line management of the individual, it tends to matter less. If it's coming directly from their boss or their boss's boss, it matters a heck of a lot more for them. So getting to that direct line management is hugely important. Being able to tell the organizational story so that they understand why it matters to the organization with the whole picture is hugely important. Marketing campaigns really tie into the motivation. Having executive advocates that can speak to why this matters to the organization as a whole matters a lot here as well. And then taking time to celebrate accomplishments matters a heck of a lot here too. So we're helping people understand where things are going right. When we're doing a rollout, we tend to talk about things that aren't working and push people when things aren't going well. But it's pretty easy to forget to celebrate when things are working the way they should be working. That accomplishment of celebrations overlaps a bit with structure. So with structure, we want to talk about progress reports and follow-up. We want to talk about feedback and control mechanisms, ownership and accountability, and here's where it overlaps a bit, with rewards and recognition, and then with consequences. So backing up to rewards and recognition and that accomplishment celebration, some ways that I've seen that work that are really fairly simple are, I had an organization that decided that they were going to put poster boards in the lobbies of their main locations, and they were going to track every time an individual completed the task that they were looking for them to complete. In this case, they were rolling out a learning management system, and they wanted people to go into the system and complete training in the system. When people went in and completed their first training course, they put a gold foil star next to their name on the poster board. Now, this is the type of motivation that we typically think of working for first graders. It's not something we typically think of working for adults. But you would not believe how much that changed people's motivation to go in and do this. So just simply giving people positive reinforcement and a little bit of competition as they went through this changed the way that people perceived their interest in participating in this. So we think a lot about, what do we give away? Do we give away an iPad to get people to do this? And the big things that people need to think they need to do in order to get people motivated to move forward. But sometimes it's as simple as a gold foil star and doing the thing that's, it's cheap, it's easy, but it makes people aware of their participation and other people's participation and drives a little bit of that competitive edge. That last item on there for structure, consequences. We have to keep in mind, now that I've told you about the first grade concept here, we also have to keep in mind that the consequences don't necessarily mean that we have to beat them with a stick if they don't participate the way we need them to participate. With adults, consequences can simply mean that we need to talk to them about what happens if this doesn't succeed. What does it mean to the organization if what we are rolling out is not successful, so that people understand why it's important for them to move forward. So let's talk about the components of a change strategy. So as we roll out a change strategy within our organization, we divide this into three main areas. We consider this in the plan stage, the discover stage, and the build stage. I'd like to talk through a little bit about each of these stages so we have a little more detail on these. So we start at the beginning. What does success look like? Where are we planning to go once we've got this complete? So most people have built out their business case for why they're making the change in the first place, but the business case can be kind of vague in a lot of situations. So we want to dig in and really understand what success looks like long term. So a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what does this look like? What are those long-term goals that we need to get to? So we spend a good deal of time making sure we understand what it is that we want to accomplish. From there, we go into the stage of managing expectations. That includes setting out goals for 30 days after you go live, 90 days after you've launched the rollout, 180 days after you've launched the rollout, and then getting to that year-long goal that starts to overlap with that first success metric. There are two reasons for this. The first reason is that when you are going through a rollout that's going to be part of your organization for a long period of time like this, you have to understand what the small steps are to get to that. And you have to understand how you're going to accomplish the big goal, which means you need the short-term goals to get there. The second part of this is I've watched so many organizations go through the process of laying out their business case for why they're going to make a large-scale change, talking to their executives about what this change looks like, and then going through the change and having the executives come back to them 10 minutes after they've rolled out the change and say, great, now you've done this. Now I'd like to see the results of this strategic change you told me you were going to make. And it turns out when you are just right out of rollout, you haven't made that strategic change. You're still trying to figure out how to get users logged into the system. You're still trying to figure out how to send manuals out to people. You definitely haven't reached the point of getting to that strategic change. If you can set out what these short-term goals look like and communicate these out to everyone that's involved in the change process and to those executives, you've got a plan set so that you're very clear to everyone involved how you're going to get to that long-term goal, and then you don't have that fire drill, which makes life a lot easier for everybody involved. The next area we focus on is establishing controls. With establishing controls, we're just simply looking at understanding who's going to be involved in the change process, how often that change team is going to meet, what the change project plan looks like, and getting the basics in place to manage the change process. Then we look at defining roles. So who are you going to involve outside of the change team as part of the change process? So the two main roles that I would consider here are who are the executive sponsors that you're going to have as part of this. So do you have executive sponsors that are outside of the learning and development area, the HR area, that can really drive this forward? And having those executive sponsors is just so incredibly important to make sure that it's clear that this is a priority for the organization as a whole. The other main role that's very important to make sure you have in place is to have influencers within the organization ready to go. Having influencers ready to go gives you the ability to have cheerleaders within the organization that can help to drive things forward for you. So what I'm looking for with an influencer is those people that just naturally drive other people to follow them. They naturally move people forward, even when they're not in a management position. People just follow them. Finding those people and getting them involved either in the project that you're running or involving them just simply in the rollout process goes so far in making sure that you've got a successful change process. That takes us into the discover phase. And the discover phase, we'll spend a little bit of time looking at this in a second. But what we would do in the discover phase is review experiences. Taking a second to review past experiences that you've experienced yourself and experiences that you have rolled out yourself. So what worked really well and what didn't. And then an audience analysis. So you consider every group that's going to be affected by the change. Make sure you understand how you're going to use that to build out communication better. And then identify barriers so you know where you have potential risks as part of your rollout and how you're going to overcome those. And then we have an impact analysis review. And that impact analysis review allows you to go audience by audience and consider with each audience what it is that is going to motivate them, what it is that's changing for them, what it is that they need to know, what it is that works best for training for them, and really drive into the specifics for every audience so that as you build out communication, marketing, and training, you have each of the elements for each audience ready and prepared. Now that step is one that you can skip if you don't want to go so deep into a change strategy. But if you have the time and the resources to be able to do that, it's a great way to make sure that you've got a really customized change strategy. Like I said, you don't have to go deep into every change strategy you do, and that's an area you can skip if you don't have the time. That takes us into the build strategy, and the build strategy starts with establishing the message. What I recommend with establishing the message is starting by building what I would consider just slightly bigger than an elevator pitch. So building out a message that gives you information in bulleted format that talks about what the most important elements are that you need to communicate as you roll this change out to your organization that every single audience member is going to need to know. What are the top priority items that you need to communicate? As you then continue to build out communication, and as you have other members of the organization communicating on your behalf, you then have a set of bullet points that you can give to them so that everybody's singing from the same songbook. And there's just huge importance there that in making sure that there's consistency in the message, but that you're allowing people to give the message in a way that works for the audience that they're talking to. Especially if you're asking direct line managers to talk to their group, they know the tone and the way to speak to their group that's going to work for them, but you still need the consistency to make sure that they are communicating properly. Once you have that base in place, it's a whole lot easier to then go audience by audience and say, here's the base starting point for the email communication I'm going to send out. But what I need to add for this group is some additional information that talks to this specific adjustment that needs to be made for speaking to my IT team about the change that matters to them. Here's the specific change that needs to be made as I speak to executives and give them a PowerPoint presentation that's going to be used in their meeting. And you can make adjustments from that base that gives you a starting point for everything. That takes you into building out your communication plan, building out your marketing plan, and building out your training plan.
Hello, Anna.
Yeah.
Sorry. We lost you for a second. Just wanted to make sure you were there. Thank you.
Oh. Yeah. So did you lose the end of the last part that I was just saying?
Yes, if you could repeat the last 30 seconds, that would be great.
Okay, so lost me on establishing message?
Yes.
All right, so with establishing message, there's importance in making sure you have the consistency across everyone who's communicating your message. And so with that, no matter who's communicating the message, whatever group they're communicating to, if you hand them a set of bullet points, they can put their own spin on that. They can give it their own flavor so that it matches the group they're speaking to, but you have consistency with that so they are communicating in a way that still gets the message across that you need them to get across. You also then can take the bullet points that you have there and use that to build out any communication you have for additional groups. So as you're building out PowerPoint slides or emails for each different audience, you use that as your base and then add in additional information you need to communicate the change that's happening to your HR team, the change that's happening to your IT team, the change that the executives need to understand. But you've got a base starting point and then you adjust from there, which makes life a lot easier. Then I wanted to jump into a couple of these components so we could just think a little bit more about these. So I talked earlier about managing expectations and what that would look like, and that we would think about things in terms of 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, and then that year-long goal. You can make these goals any level that you want, any time period that you want, but these tend to be pretty easy time periods to think through for most people. So where I tend to think about the breakdown within each of these is at the 30-day mark and at the 90-day mark, you are really just dealing with the rollout itself and making sure the rollout is going smoothly. When you get to the 180-day mark, you're dealing with a tactical change within your organization. By the time you get to the year mark, you're starting to deal with a more strategic change. So if I think about examples with this, at the 30-day mark, you're just looking at how many people have logged into your system. At the 90-day mark, you might be looking one level deeper. So it might be a percentage of people that have taken a class. And forgive me, these are more technology-based. But at a tactical level, when you get to that 180-day mark, this might be the number of people who have completed a performance review. So now it's more than just getting them to the system, getting them into whatever you're doing. But now that you're looking at the big picture of whether you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, But it's still not that I've changed the business sort of goal that we're talking about when we're looking at a business case. When you get to the 365-day goal, that's the first point that you really start to change the business. So that's where you could say something along the lines of, I've increased the level of manager satisfaction for my direct reports due to manager training that's been completed. Something along those lines, something that you can track in an employee engagement survey has started to change. Those type of things begin to change at that year mark. But that's how I think about the change that's happening within an organization due to a rollout as a typical plan. Also wanted to look at the barriers that we talked about and how you would think about barriers. There are certain barriers that tend to crop up for most organizations, and so just to put these out there so you can think about these specifically. The barriers that I see most often are political barriers, geographical barriers, financial barriers, cultural barriers, technical barriers, informational barriers, and barriers that relate to time restriction. So those are good areas to start to think about to see if you've got any of these potential barriers as you consider the rollout that you're going through. What I would do with each of these is to stop and think through, do I have a barrier in this area? What exactly is that barrier? Have I considered what the possible ways around this barrier are so that I make sure that I've got a plan to overcome this barrier? And then how am I going to deal with that as I move forward? So barriers and risks really kind of fall into the same category here, but you want to make sure that you've got a plan as you think through these so that you can make sure that these don't catch you off guard as you move forward. Also good things to make sure you're communicating up the chain as you go through the implementation portion. As I mentioned earlier, reviewing experiences is just hugely important. So I would really encourage you to take some time with the team that you're working with for your implementation, for your rollout, to sit down and brainstorm with this. It's a really simple exercise, but it really gets to the heart of what you want to do as you go through your change management process. So focus on what worked really well with any rollout you experienced recently. What is it that you want to duplicate from what worked well? What didn't work well? And what is it that you want to avoid? Look at this from two different angles. Look at this from, I was an end user and someone made this change and this is how it felt as the end user. Start there, because how it feels is really different than your experience having rolled something out. And you get a lot of insight when you just sit back and think about, ooh, when they scheduled training and they did it in this way, and I didn't have a choice about what time I took a training, and that wasn't a very convenient day for me, and they forced me into it. That's the kind of thing that we want to make sure that we're thinking about as we plan our change strategy. And then go back and think about it from the other side. Last time you planned a rollout, how did that work? What worked well for you? What didn't work? And make sure that you're taking that into consideration as you move forward. What I see happen pretty much every time I ever go through this exercise is people have trouble thinking about the first part. It's a lot easier to start with the what didn't work so well and what do you want to avoid. And that's okay. You start there and you get out all the stuff that didn't work well. And once you get all of that out on the table, then you come back to the what worked well and what do you want to duplicate, because the good stuff bubbles up. It's just sometimes you have to get through the bad stuff and talk through all that first before you can remember that there were some pretty good things that were in there too. You just have to get through them before you can get to the good stuff sometimes. We talked about audience analysis and who's impacted by the change. So it's really easy to think through the end users and that you need to communicate to your executives. There may be some changes that you need to communicate to your IT team, those types of things. One group that I would really encourage you to think about is oftentimes as we go through these types of changes, the group that's really most heavily impacted in their day-to-day life is our own HR group. And we forget that we need to deal with the change process with the HR group and make sure that they're comfortable with the change too. So even if they're part of the committee that's working on the project, and even if they're involved all the way through, we still need to take the time to talk to them and make sure that they're comfortable and they're feeling good about the change that's happening. So sometimes this is a more one-on-one process and a more hands-on approach as you go through this. But take the time to make sure that you're dealing with the HR change that's happening as you go through this adjustment. Very important as you deal with this. You definitely need them on board as they're speaking to other people about the adjustment that's happening. So as you're thinking about your change management communication plan, something to think about in how you lay out your communication strategy, you want to make sure that the level of detail you're providing gets bigger and more detailed the closer you get to the live date. So you want to start with an overall high-level concept. I would encourage you to start with that overall high-level concept very early on in whatever change you're going through. The reason I say this is anytime there are closed-door meetings that are happening about anything, this can be a great change you're making that's meant to be super positive for all the employees in your organization, but you go into a separate room and you close the door and you start talking about it, and all of a sudden there are rumors flying about what possibly could be happening behind that closed door. So communicate early what the change is, even when you don't have all the facts and even when you don't have the details, to just let them know that there's something positive coming and that this is going to be great for them, and you'll let them know more as details come out. But the sooner you can get them involved, the better. Heck, backing up one step further, think about change management in terms of who you involve when you go through the RFP process. Who you involve to help you make the decision about what this change should look like is definitely important, because those people have ownership as they go through the changes. So it can start very early when you think about who you should have involved in this process. But start with that high-level communication to the company as a whole, and then move into additional details. And so talking about what it is you're going to need from an individual and talking about how it affects them. And with that, what matters to them, what's in it for them, what's in it for the organization as you go through the change. And then right when you get to the live date, that's when you start to communicate the what do they need to do, when do they need to do it, what does training look like, here are the details for a quick reference guide that you need, here's the process change that you need, if you need a login, here's the login. All of that information doesn't matter at the beginning, but it's very important when you get right down to the live date. The base for thinking through your communication plan, more detail as you get closer to live. So as we think through change management overall, if you do it well, you get a lot more improvement in your end user adoption. It really helps to reduce and manage resistance. It improves your ability to execute as you go through, and it improves your likelihood of success. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I am anxious to hear your questions.
Just as a friendly reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A or the chat window. But Anna, we do actually have a few questions.
Great.
The first is, what are some things we can do to get managers and supervisors to support an organizational-wide change and the related strategy?
Give them attention and time early on. And so the sooner you can get them involved in the change process and help them to understand why it's important to them, the better. And giving them some autonomy as they communicate the change tends to work really well as well. So So we talked about that communication where you give them bullet points and let them communicate to their team. That tends to work really well because then they feel like they have that ownership to give that communication rather than an email just going out to their teams. And so if you can allow them the flexibility to communicate to their team, that tends to be a very positive process to go through. The thing that makes it slightly more difficult is you generally need to follow up and make sure it happened. There are going to be a few managers that don't necessarily follow through on that unless you push them a little bit.
And Anna, there's a related question. What about when an influencer is a frontline person who is, very effective in pushing the change forward, but her supervisor is a resistor? How can, he or she be used as an influencer without potentially alienating the supervisor or manager?
In that case, you definitely need to address the situation directly with the supervisor or manager, or potentially escalate above the supervisor or manager. So making sure that you're dealing with that so you don't put that influencer in a negative situation is important. You don't want to put them in a bad spot. But dealing with that resistance head on is always going to be better than waiting for it to bubble up until it becomes a much worse situation. And so I've found that just talking with them and dealing with them can be very effective as you go through the process. It's a lot harder to be negative when somebody's talking to you about it instead of the negativity that can happen when they're talking to other people instead. On a side note with that, if you have people in your organization that tend to be that negative person over and over and over again, they're going to resist everything that you roll out no matter what. Add them to your implementation process. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when you pull them into the implementation process and they're part of the decision making, it's a lot harder for them to go against it because it's the decisions they made as they went through. So it's a little bit more of a pain for you as you go through the process itself, but you don't have to deal with that pain ongoing as they continue to resist you for the life of the project that you're working on.
And we have another related question. Anna, do you find that there must be one person at the head of the change management strategy for accountability purposes, or can there be a team with equal responsibility in the change strategy?
Interesting. I think it makes sense to have one person that has ultimate responsibility to make sure everything's coming together with people that represent each of the individual areas of the business that can roll it out to the individual areas of the business.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in. What can you share about the special role the training group might have during organizational changes, and how can including the training group early in the process help increase success?
Well, making sure we've got a strong training plan and that the training plan is well executed is hugely important as you think through the change process. So making sure that you've got clear ideas and direction with them early on is going to be very important. Thinking through some different and unusual ways with that is absolutely a positive as you go through the process. And then thinking through ways that you can be a bit more hands-on as you go through is definitely a positive as you go through the process too. I think leave-behinds are very important, so especially if you're thinking about technology, making sure you have quick reference guides and things like that that you can hand off as you go through the process is very important. But getting them involved early so it's not that rush at the end is key as you go through the process.
And then besides written communications, advising a team of changes, what are some suggestions you have for other modes of communication?
Let's see. So using team meetings. So if you have town halls, those can be very effective. If you have team meetings that you can be part of, those are very effective. If you have communication that comes from executives within your organization, be it written letters, be it meetings that they have on a regular basis, go for those as well. Newsletters are very effective. Table tents can work very well. Posters work really well. I've had people use coffee mugs. I've had people use mouse pads. I've seen some unusual options that direction as well. Lunch and learns tend to work. One group that I had that had a very odd idea that I liked a lot was they had mats produced that had information about their live date that followed up with a large change management strategy they rolled out, so it didn't have to have a lot of information on it. But these mats were essentially just big floor mats that were placed at the front door in every major entrance. So when people walked in, they had a big reminder that the change was happening that day. Lots of different options you can consider, but very important to keep in mind as you're going through this process that you need to think about new and different ways to reach people. So using your intranet, using email signature tags that have information on them, thinking about different ways to reach different generations of people within your organization is really important. I come from an advertising background before I came into HR. In particular, I was a media buyer. And one of the things I knew from buying media was for every television commercial that I purchased, I needed to place it in front of people 12 times for them to even acknowledge that they'd seen the commercial. So before you really remember you saw a commercial, you have to see it 12 times. So I always think about that when I'm thinking through a communication plan or a marketing plan. How many times do I have to put this out in front of people before they realize that it happened? And we have so frequently gone through this process of saying, well, I sent them an email and told them the performance process was changing. Can't believe they don't remember it. And we've got to hit them up in lots of different ways, lots of different times before this becomes something that they recognize has changed.
Great, thanks, Anna. And that's all of our questions. As a last reminder to everyone, today's slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Foundation website within 48 hours. We will be sending everybody who participated on today's webinar a follow-up email that will have a link to this location of where the webinar is posted, and then we'll also be providing information on the next webinar in our HR Pro Bono CAR webinar series. So thank you again to everyone for your participation and really great questions, and an especially big thank you to Anna for a great presentation. Thanks to everyone and have a great day.